Today is Monday for you guys. It's Saturday for us. So I get to have a drink. You know what's in there? Total War 250 milligrams of caffeine pre-workout. Bob and weave and cover Selena. I think there's enough stuff here. A lot of this is going to be talking. Well, I think that's always like that, but talking about what's going on versus what there is to look at. Oh, this is probably the most prominent area. Okay, let's think about last update. Oh, we got followers. We got all the dogs. Talked about the front suspension getting ordered, upgrading all of the spindles, hubs, beams to Andrew's new stuff. We have that stuff. It's over on the table. We definitely need to talk about the front. Right now is solidifying this rear sheet metal. While I'm talking, I'm thinking about what we went over because I did not do a recap right now. I think we had the seat mounts in. No? Cool. I think I talked about this before. Final welding is very tricky and you need to be a lot more detailed with clientele because they assume that that is the last welding that's ever gonna go on their car. Final welding is a final welding, so final welding on the harness bar tubes, final welding on the seat mounts, final welding on the shock mount, final welding on the bump stop mount, you know what I'm saying? Okay, so getting this, we got Selena back as a roller, and then we still needed to do a bunch of stuff. This car came, you know, when JP had it at the shop, we did not have any of the sheet metal done, so part of this is these enclosure panels that you see. Getting the seats mounted, thinking we were gonna have room. I remember when like Pilgrim came, I was talking about like putting a cooler back here and all that, and you'll see a lot of trucks, they bail on the 4-seat program and they add like a cooler, tool bags, things like that, and they free up the room because really once you put 4 seats into these cars, all the space goes away, and that's what we have. So like there's 4 containment seats, well not containment but composite seats in here, all PRP kilos, which are the larger ones. Pilgrim's a big old tall guy. I think that's turning into the thing. I deal with like all my newer clients are tall ass dudes, or I'm just getting shorter. So, you know, running the kilo makes sense, but also having typical seating where it's all the same seat is, you know, the proper way to do this. So 4 seats in here, the space goes away. The shocks are in the cabin. Why are the shocks in the cabin? Because we favored proper trophy truck geometry. You can definitely run a trailing arm with the shock further back. Some, you know, they've kind of coined that the crew cab trailing arm. I don't know the right or wrong or good or bad. I know what works. And for me, basing a lot of stuff off of trophy truck setup is premium to me for a pre-runner. So, you know, from the start with Selena, we always ran a traditional trailing arm with a shock ratio on the trailing arm. It's almost 50-50. And then we play it where it lies. We shorten the wheelbase on this thing. Like if you imagine, once we get the tire on here, the tire, the 39 or the 40 will be like 1.5 inches from the back of the cab to the closest portion of the tire when it's at full compression, because it does swing and kind of pull the wheelbase closer. So with that, you know, we wanted to just get rid of extra wheelbase as much as we could. I think this thing's, is that a big old black bee? I think this thing is 135. But that being said, that's why the shocks are where they are. what I was talking to Joey about is making some of this more personal for you guys, for me to share with you. But I think that that's true. You know, every time I'm talking to the camera, not holding it like this, I'm talking to Joey, and Joey's one of my close friends. He's family to me, so it is like talking to a homie. But this is probably the best for details, and that's where we want to kind of have you know, incorporate both of these. These are steel. You know, the spec on stuff like this is I like to use 18 gauge cold roll. There's quite a process to getting that shape. You know, there's a tipping die here. There's a tipping die here. There's a weld here. There's a weld here. And then there's a return. So actually in here, you can see this return that's all welded. And that was actually one straight piece, like a, you know, like a piece of angle looking sheet metal. And then I shrunk it. So you can see all the shrink marks on here. See the double holes where I had to re-drill. So all that will get cleaned up, but that return is actually sunk in, and it's sunk in just enough where the weather strip, you know, that big bulb weather strip will clear. And then what I did for the hardware, because all of this will be replaced with like a 1024, is I did the hardware as close to the seam of the cab. So when you put the weather stripping on there, you don't see, I'm hoping that you don't see the hardware, or you barely see the hardware. So then when it's in here, it's super streamlined. One of the things that I was getting at, so like this is your typical deal, right? That's a, you know, a piece of sheet metal with a step down, and then there's a service panel in there. You know, all the Clecos will get replaced with hardware, but that makes your reach minimal. And for this, for servicing these things, it's a real bummer for Keith or anybody, not just taking the shocks on and off, but to make adjustments, reaching through a little service panel like that. So this whole thing, that whole piece is removable. It all comes out, and then you can literally get to the back side of the shocks. You can get to the bolts. The time you'd probably need this inside one is just going to be for installation or removal of the shocks. So, you know, figuring out what to do first. My pattern with the sheet metal is to never seal up the middle first, so I can get in here and work. Because if I come right through here, then we're in a good spot, and then I can get these details. So, you know, figuring some of this flow out. These are just roughly tacked in here. You know, you can see where we're gonna have to close stuff and kind of hammer and dolly form it. Same down here. It's just hanging out. I used to, when I was building stuff, a lot of times I would fit stuff by means of clamping it and hitting it. And now it's really, I like to get the panel as close as I can, where it just wants to lay on there and it's free. And then just, you know, these edges, obviously, is just something I can work and massage. But, you know, all of this is the foundation for what we want with the sheet metal. I wanted this corner to kind of rise up high, you know, and have this beautiful shape. We don't need all this space back here. I'd rather favor the inside of this. This is going to be a pretty complex piece to build, so that's next on the list here. Get this one on. But the thing is, I'm barely tacking this on, because then when I get this piece, I want to take the return off here. See, this is another return. So I'm gonna tack everything, and then I'm gonna take this off and sand it and get it good. And you know, this whole piece is gonna come off with this and this, because that's, you know, a rolled edge that's ready for a piece of sheet metal to go here. So all this can come off and get metal finished really nice before I put it on. This is a really easy edge to metal finish because it's exposed, it's not buried. But when I'm having to run like a grinder, a sander, a burnisher all the way up into these areas, this is, you know, a pain in the ass. So building it, tacking it, making it light, you know, on the tacking so I can crack it off, finishing this whole thing on the car, then putting it back on, and then just buzzing this one seam with weld, blend it all out, and I can run whatever tooling I need right here. But you can kind of see the flow. Other stuff that I started to do, you know, first off is we built the seat mounts. Oh boy, we're going back big time right now. Luke actually did the seat mounts. I'm gonna go out here because I want to show you why it's like this. We put thought into this stuff. So one thing we wanted to do with the seat mounts is have them suspended, meaning that that front tube is not coming up from the chassis or the floor, but it's leaving a void, because now we have all this storage under here and it's uninterrupted storage. You know, you could fit rifles under here, tools under here, you know, aid under here, whatever you need. And it just gives you that same, you know, same thing here. I didn't want to close this out just to make it easy. I wanted to favor openings, have an exposed tube, but not just that, have ways to store stuff, grab stuff, you know, everything. When the seats go in here, everything gets tighter. It's, you know, we've learned that the hard way, and a lot of this stuff is just learning from repetition. When the seats, like I remember in Vivian, the seat mounts are the harness mounts for the seats, and the seat mounts themselves are really tough to get to, and it's just because things fill up, so you have to think ahead. And that's the same thing, you know, like say for instance, this boss, right? That's a big old threaded piece of chromoly, and that's where the lap belt is gonna be. So I'm gonna have to have an opening in here, which is probably just gonna be like a plug, so I can access from in here and put the bolt in with a tool, you know. But again, that's why that's not, you know, a nut capture on the backside, so we're only working one tool to get it in. We're not trying to have double tools to hold these. It's the same thing, you know, there's bolts here that are stovers, so the stovers are going to capture in the same way, you know, they're going to capture the lap belt. Oh my god, why do I keep wanting to say shoulder? They're going to capture the lap belt, so we can work on this thing easier, and it's not going to be like this pain in the ass to just get the seats in and out. The other thing, so floor made sense. Let me catch my breath here. I can slow down. Oh, Hank, you're looking old. Poor guy. Since we moved here, he aged like 5 years. Let's stick to the seat mounts because I'm already so past the seat mounts, and if we haven't caught up. Anyways, these are easy. They're non-adjustable. The shoulder straps, I always like to run a non-clip. I don't like the clip-in version for your shoulders. There's a safety thing there that just rubs me wrong. So, you know, these are just slightly spaced off the tubing, just enough to get around and then up to the seats. Something you'll notice that I'm preparing for, let's grab a straight edge. So what I'm trying to show you guys is the planning for what's next. So what I'd wanted to do here is build this differently. It's the same with the Willys. If you remember the undercarriage of the Willys, we favored putting the sheet metal on the exterior side of the tube work, not the interior. So that's what this is, right? This transitions from being on the top portion of the cabin in the stock sheet metal, and then it drops down and it transitions to where this tin work is on the underside, so it's going to be streamlined. Well, what's happening here now is instead of doing the easy peasy and just going, yeah, sick, get it all right here, I want to favor the real estate. This is a little long, but you can see that the return, a little bonered out right there. The return here is set up exactly to run right on here. So the back wall is actually like an inch from the back of the seat, maybe 1.5 inches. But whenever this seat comes through and it goes up, I took measurements. So then what we get to do is we get to run the wall super tight to the constraint of the seats and then dive back over to this tube. What that does is it gives us all of the real estate through here. This whole section turns into extra chassis packaging section. Why does that get valuable? Because there's just not a lot of room. There's fuel pumps, you know, there's fuel filters. So right now this thing's gonna run 2 pumps, 4 filters, pre and post, and that's a redundant backup pump. There's batteries, right? So that right off the bat, when I look at this, I'm like, okay, easy. We can at least, you know, maybe we want the fuel pumps and the filters to be somewhere more serviceable, but we can at least rip batteries right here. You know, you'd have terminals outside, you'd have your cutoff switch, so you don't necessarily need to service these things. You could even have a remote for the trickle, but this gives you this void. And then what's nice is when I run the sheet metal from out here, I can have it just kick up And then we'll get another win where we'll panel in all this with aluminum panel work. So that's where their construction is I have this vision of building this, you know, this back wall that's a floating sheet metal wall that gives us extra space through here. And it lets us have room for plumbing, you know, for wiring, all that stuff where we're not just closing out. Like, I feel it's really easy to just close out a chassis from the inside because it's easy and fun and you start stomping out triangles, but you lose, you know, like the example is if you have seat here and then you close all this out, what in the fuck are you putting behind the seats? You're never gonna get back there. It's gonna suck. It's gonna have to be something that you do not need to maintain, or you have to pull the seats out to get to. There's just not a viable way. I mean, you can snake your arm through here, but it's tricky. So you're literally losing out on a huge amount of packaging here. So that's the next plan for this area. Stuff. Little details on the seat mounts. That's kind of a built-in gusset. Big ass breather hole, dude. My goodness. Oh, so, you know, this gets us, it's always fun, huh? Try to run symmetry as hard as we can on these things. But this is what I'm talking about. So, you know, favoring sheet metal on the exterior of the chassis and not on the top. And this just cleans it up. You know, imagine having to like pressure wash these things, and if it's the other way, right? Instead of it looking like this on the outside, it looks like this. You know, where you have to get in there and there's mud and, you know, silt and anything that dries up and gets shitty, you have to get in there and it's next to impossible. So you almost just have to take an L. So getting this as streamlined as possible is gonna be the move. While we're under here, dang, that's pretty good. So I'm just gonna paint the picture here for you guys. Things we need to think about here. This void, this lower void, so this is the belt line, right? That's where your shoulder strap is, and that's going back. This whole void needs to be the transmission cooler. So, you know, I sent it to PWR already. Hayden's taking care of that. 20 by 36, I think. It's gonna occupy here. The next thing we need to negotiate is going to be exhaust. This does want a 4-inch system. So I've already taken 4-inch tubing and ran through here and figured out, okay, you know, these links, like we build these things tight. So that upper link there, you know, when it wants to come to the center of the housing, it's probably going to be like enough just to clear the plumbing on the link, like the breather and the, you know, the lines for the brakes. So maybe there's an inch. So that exhaust is going to have to snake down the middle, do some kind of a, you know, an X pipe through here, pop back out. We're gonna have to have a partition because that's gonna be hot. Even though this fan is gonna pull, you know, from the top, there's gonna have to be a partition, and then what's gonna go on here is gonna be sick exit. I'm gonna grab a piece of 4-inch. I think this is what I did last time. Oh yeah, there she is. I would have never thought that we have organization like this. If the rest of my life could be like that, it'd be great. All right. So you're limited here too, right? Because bump stop is here. Tire is gonna be somewhere in this void. So this 4-inch is gonna have to snake somewhere sick. I think it was through here and it needs to wrap. Look at how gnarly that is. That needs to come through, go down, wrap into that bastard, and then shoot into that middle like we talked about, and that's where the X pipe will be. You know, so we're gonna get the win here because I'm running it straight, but think about the bends you can put in here. You get a rip here, you get the rip right here, around the bump stop all clean, And then, I mean, there's gonna be some kind of exit like that, and it'll just be clean into the tin work. Something else to note is the dry sump tank. Dry sump tank is gonna be mounted out back. Anthony's building that for us, but that's gonna be something that lives here. It has to be aft of the sway bar arm, because that sway bar arm is gonna go up into that thing, dirt into the axle. So just lots to think about. Stuff to think about. Let's close out the rear. Unless you wanna see how one of these panels comes off. Why don't I do that for you guys? I'm gonna get one of these panels off for you. Again, like a lot of this stuff is experience and lessons. When we did the access panel in James Frontier, there's a lot of them in that central engine tunnel area. Dude, we had, I bet the spacing for the hardware, I think it's less than 2 inches. So there's so many pieces of hardware and so much to do just to get it off. And my brain is like, well, it's gotta be sealed. Got to be sealed, man. And so you find a medium of like where the seal is. This is something we'd want to weather strip, and then like look at what this covers, and then look at the serviceability you get now that we don't have just an access panel. We have everything, and once that's off, I can get in here and do anything you need. I can get nitrogen, I can get the bolts, I can get any rebound, any compression. So, you know, change the collar, all good. So that's what this is going to look like. The reason there's a return on here, which is that lip, so there's not just this bevel, there's also a return. And what this return is gonna be the mounting surface, and it's just, look at how chunky it is. You know, I'll come back in there and finish it, and you can see all of the metal shaping. So that's all planishing hammer, English wheel, because this surface is not just flat. There's a lot of care put into that thing to make it look more natural and organic. It's not just flat panels. So I like to put shape into these. Now I've learned, even with the sand car, which we'll be covering, I almost run everything through an English wheel or planishing hammer before I even start building the shape into it. Just because it stretches it in a way that like it makes sense to me. Anyways, this is going to get a transparent piece in here. Optic armor, whatever the case. You know, the question is like, will this just get dirty and muddy really quick? You'd have to work for it, and I'm sure Pilgrim will, and he'll get the win with getting mud into here, but it comes off just the same as anything else. So if you're cleaning stuff, you know, this is an upholstered piece in the future, something that would be wrapped. You'd have hardware in here, you buzz this off, wipe it, probably play your cards right, and you could wipe it from it outside, like under the car. There's enough built into here. The reason that this is not deep, you know, because if you're you know, going on boner patrol, you'd want to build this thing all sick and, you know, really deep bevels. Problem is these shocks swing. So what I did is I put these into a place where I felt they would swing maximum, you know, all the way to where they're hitting the weld washers on the inside of the shock mounts, you know, and then I built to that. So I did the depth setting on this thing based on if the trailing arms are articulating or not, so we're not going to crash into the window, because that would be not optimal. I don't want the misalignments to fall out. Kingston, look at you go, buddy. So these are OhCho. These are like your new knuckle or spindle for four-wheel drive beams that Andrew does. Previous to this is what Selena had, and we'll show you that, but that's That's your more typical Dana 44. Get out of my face, you know. Dana 44 ball joint shit. This is your max upgrade, you know, top tier level thing. So that's a 1.5 inch spherical bearing. This is a Baldy racing hub. Baldy started producing these. So sick. So this is your 4-wheel drive front hub, 6 on 6.5 trophy truck pattern. You know what I notice about the flies up here? Like when they're in here, they are so healthy looking. They're green and like pearlescent. I wonder if they're still barfing or shitting on my arm when they land there, but man, they're pretty to look at. These are, you know, set up for, you know, rotor hat, Coleman rotor, all the goods. So now you don't have any loose ends on running this TTB setup in the front. It's all like race spec. This is going to handle a 40-inch tire, no problem. That's your 4.5 inch bypass, which is a far superior size for the front. Okay, I think we should talk about what's going on here. There's always a thing with building. One side will always tell you different bits of information if it's an asymmetrical thing, right? So right now we have a TTB, a twin traction beam. It's a 4-wheel drive, forward-based suspension. There's a differential on the driver's side that goes over, and just like scissor suspension. There's a shorter side, you know, they're linked together with a slip joint, U-joint, and there's axles and stuff, and so there's power to the front. The thing is, everything swings on a different ratio because the beam for the driver's side is longer, the passenger side is shorter, so things are different. The other thing is, just on packaging cars in general, sometimes there's workarounds because one side has stuff, a constraint that's not on the other side, and if you don't double check, then you get into a bind, and that's the segue. What we found out here, we got everything, we put the new beams on, we transferred all the data, so, you know, got rough mock-up on like, took the old beams, wherever the shock mounts and the sway bar mounts were and the strike pad mounts for the bumps, all that stuff measured, started replicating all that onto the new beams. Got it on here just to double check stuff before we went any further or started finishing the fabrication on them. And we go, okay, looks good. Then I start seeing stuff. One of the things, if you go back way into the old Selena episode, is this shock mount was not done. That one was. We built it off that thing, did all the settings off that, but that shock mount wasn't done. Fast forward, I look on here, the shock mount is replicated to that, so it's symmetrical. But I look and I'm going, okay, this is weird. I double check all the numbers. Luke's been doing everything. He's double checking, so we're like looking at shock shaft, bypass shock shaft at ride height is one of the most important things to me, period, for setup. Up travel, distance per side, droop distance per side, how much shock shaft is showing per side, and trying to find the similarities, because there should be. All of that should have a similarity. All of it should share the same stuff. What I'm noticing is how much shock shaft, the biggest thing is right at ride height. I go, whoa, dude, there is 2 inches less shock shaft at ride height than this thing. And it was wonky. And what I realized is because the steering, we put huge time into getting the steering right, where we're using straight tie rods on this thing. And it clears bump to lock. The Ackerman's good, like everything is good. But what that rendered is the bypass mount is higher on this side, and it has to be higher because it has to clear the tie rod. On that side, it doesn't have to clear the tie rod as much, and that's the side we built out. So we missed originally when we built this thing for the first round, we missed on that. And it's so good we caught it because it would have been a huge driving dynamic sacrifice. So, you know, that's what I'm saying is everything needs to be checked out, where you don't just build the one side and assume it's going to be the same, because it's not an equal length beam setup. This required more, where that bypass mount needed to be up higher and staged up to clear the tie rod under there. So we should have taken that into consideration and not built the bypass mount on the driver's side. We should have said, okay, well, there's something that's telling us information, because then if the bypass mount, dude, I hope this all makes sense. We should have like a little cartoon narration. The bypass mount on this side doesn't have to clear any of that. So then when it's at compression, the shock mount is lower. I go, okay, well, what do we need to do here to get this right? Because number one thing is we're still building a foundation here. Even though it's a roller, it's a foundation. The amount of time, energy, and money that's invested into the project like this, get the foundation. It's like building a badass house on a bad foundation. That is gonna lead to huge problems later. It's the same thing. Imagine if you have your truck set up and your bypass is engaging into the compression zone, the last 4 inches of stroke on the bypass, it's engaging into the compression zone earlier on one side than the other. Just think about that. And then the valving is just, you know, the whole thing is a parasitic problem. So I go, okay, well, we know that the bypass mount needs to be at that height on the beam. So build the bypass, you know, upper mount, redo that. We redo that one. It's 2 inches higher than this side. You know, all this stuff I've kind of had to, you know, the one revision, cool, but this other call that we're going to get to, I've just ate this because it's on me, you know, to get it right. So we end up getting this thing where it cycles evenly. But what I realize is now we have this guy that's doing one of these guys over here, and that thing's 2 inches higher. So I tell Luke, I said, we just have to make the call to get this right. You have to understand there's going to be a Nelson engine nested into this thing. The symmetry, just like we were talking about earlier, the symmetry is really good for what we have here. We can't have one shock mount be higher. Then the fend reservoir, that's a detail piece that lives here, is, you know, that hole, the cap for that, the billet cap and everything is 2 inches higher over there. This whole thing is looking weird. So we didn't get far enough on the beam bypass mount down here to go like, well, shit, we already have all this welded on the new beam. No, we didn't. And thank God, that's why we double checked everything. So what we did is we went ahead, made the call, chopped both of these, got that one that demanded more height done, replicated that over here so they're equal. And then we just adjusted the bypass mount on this beam to replicate the other side. All stuff that you want to do cohesively. Again, these things, I learned everything the hard way. This wasn't a loss where the car had to go out and suffer. It was something we had the blessing and the opportunity to be able to identify now before it gets any more wonky. And now we're dialed. So everything cycles perfect. There's 9 inches of bypass shaft at ride height. Is it 9? Luke? Is it 8 or 9 at ride height? 8? Yeah, so now there's an even 8. Everything is symmetrical. Everything cycles. It bumps exactly the same. It's just doing what it's supposed to. Weird thing to overlook. Again, I learned stuff the hard way. So the good part is we nailed it. Let's go look at the beams. So this is old OhCho beams versus new OhCho beams. You can see, I mean, the other thing we opted for is all TIG welded now. So this is the MIG welded version. Still badass. And then you can see our provisions on here. You know, so this is all the old shock mounts. I don't know if I'm gonna get a rotation. Oh, I am, cool. So nice shit. Sway bar mount, coil over mount, bypass mount. Things to think about here. This is your driver side that we talked about. I don't know if you're gonna be able to tell the depth on this versus. So you can see if you do center line, if you just do a center line here and you do a center line here, you can see this one's higher. It's favoring a whole different situation. Plus it's a shorter tie rod on this. So now what we have, same thing. This stuff's re-engineered, replated. Everything's on here ready for welding. The other thing is the strike pad here. We were able to get another inch of up travel by redesigning this on each side. This is a pretty crazy strike pad because it's a suspended, it's like a hammock of a strike pad. So this is actually where the bump hits. It's all 3/16 chromoly. Right next to the radius arm, it's hidden in there. And then what this is inside of here is an internal rib that's already welded. And then we're gonna key into that, weld all that, weld everything here. And it should be rigid enough. I mean, it's 3 layers of 3/16. The strike is right down on that spine. Sometimes it's surprising how gnarly you can deform a strike pad in the bump zone. So we'll see what we get, but I think we're in a good spot. So these are ready to get welded and get back on the truck. That closes out the front until we get to the sway bar portion. And that's what I had Luke do, is leave the sway bar mounts off just so we can cycle those arms. If you remember, I think we're gonna have to go back to the truck again, but if you remember, the front of Selena has these gnarly arms for the sway bar, and then the tie rod is like 20 plus inches long. So what's cool is if you look at the truck from the side, you'll see the wheel opening and you'll see the top of the tire, and then you'll see like a badass sway bar with like a tie rod going down, because they're actually really long, because you can't have that arm. It interferes with the steering and the compression with the camber change. So this is next on the list. Get those on, get them swinging. The motor from Nelson is gonna just be a thing that we have to wait on. I wanna get maybe just, the idea here, and if you guys have other ideas, cool. The idea is maybe get a foam mock-up block, like a big block Chevy, something just typical. All in means to get the firewall clearance right. And then we need to get, you know, a Whipple that goes on top of that. So I don't know if I can contact Whipple, see if they'll get us something where we can just get a 3D print, no guts in it, just some outside dimensions. Let's actually go talk about it. My goal here is to keep the collateral damage to a minimum with firewall work. Firewalls are cool, they look cool, but the wins we're having here is there's so much of a complete truck done. I don't want to do the backward steps for no reason, so the only firewall work I want to do is just to clear the engine, possibly the transmission and the transfer case. It already had a big ass Toyota engine in here. It had a blower on top of it. It had the transmission, it had the transfer case. So we know that stuff clears. I don't know what the 8HP 9.5 is gonna do for the transmission. You know, if that's gonna add more top height. Concern is the big block and the blower. And what I'd like to do is just get some kind of mock-up going while we're waiting for the Nelson engine. And that at least lets me figure out like where I need to make the incisions, because that also can possibly hurt doing the dash. We're gonna do a full custom dash in here. I just have a gray area of like, I don't think that the dash is gonna come in enough to the firewall where it's gonna be an issue, but it's just more information that I'd like to have. So figuring out packaging here is the thing. That engine should come fully complete. So that means like it'll have a front accessory plate on it. It'll have a multi-stage daily dry sump on it, ready to rip. I'm gonna get my phone so we can look at the trailing arms, because we just revised those with Mitch. So now we can get them machined. So we're replacing the trailing arms with machine trailing arms. We're also gonna do the radius arms in 70-75 machined. So this is, you know, Mitch is the guy that I'm using for design here. This is his typical, like we did on Kevin's Raptor. And then what we had him do is add in the Selena font. I don't know if you can see that. Cool. So that's the Selena font in the middle of the shocks. And then what I also had him do, because of Jason's, is add like a consumable tray. You know, this will be a steel rock guard on the bottom of this thing. I think links are beautiful. Like the trailing arms are beautiful when they are just raw, but the problem is those are super prone to rock rash and damage. So if we just have a consumable, holy moly, phone tumble. If we have a consumable tray that's bolted on the sides and they can just bash that thing, then we can just replace those. Preserves the part super easy. So pretty stacked on Mitch stuff. That's gonna be trailing arms that have the same design language as the, or sorry, radius arms that have the same design language as the trailing arms. The sway bar arms will also represent the same design language. It's tough because Mitch has his own design language, so when we're using his trailing arms, if I design the radius arm and I do my own style to it, it is not going to speak like Mitch's stuff unless I study Mitch's stuff and then I, translate that. So the easier route is Mitch is going to take on the design work, design the radius arms for us. I'll probably send him the sway bar arms as well, and then he can design those. So they all have the same influence on each other. So when you look at the machine parts on the car, you're not like, oh, it's that design with that design and that design, and it doesn't look like a bunch of different foreign languages together. So other thing is the corporate 9. We're going to run a corporate 9 on the back of this, which is Mitch's new third member. Problem with this thing is going to be the front diff. The solo beams are cool because like Jeff's got a Gearworks 10-inch in the front of his Bronco, which is sick. These things have to be a Dana 44 or a Dana 50. The other move, it's just taking a step backwards, but is almost run. The problem is with these trucks now that are running TTB is they're not built for wide open all-wheel drive. So the claim to say it's all-wheel drive is not that, it's a four-wheel drive truck. So if you need to get out of a bind, then you put it in four-wheel drive, you rip it. I think we're sleeping on something here where if we build up the front to be more sturdy, we can run this thing in like 4 high and just rip, put all the power to 4 wheels like an all-wheel drive setup. What that requires is definitely a different diff and some real proper axles. So I think what we do is we probably run a Dana 44 in the front of this, and then we prepare to upgrade to a corporate 9 specific to the front. That would mean working with Andrew and getting the pumpkin to just be receptive to having a 9 or a 10-inch third member case in that thing. And that's something I think that'll be beneficial for OhCho anyways, because that's probably something a lot of these Broncos want. Everybody's running these twin traction beam setups, so if they have a way to put a 9-inch or a 10-inch in there, that's going to be wholesome for everybody. So I think that's something later down the road. Things to expect: drawings, fab diaries on the rear roof scoop area, the structure back there, what that's going to look like. We should have the radiator. I ordered the radiator from PWR. I think we're going to be on, this is 6 weeks, so I think right now we're week 4. So we should be getting that soon. Ordered the front conversion to a heat exchanger here. So where that old radiator is, that's now going to be a heat exchanger. The trans cooler is ordered. So we should have a cooler package coming soon. But I think really it's going to be sketching ideas for the dash, closing out the rear sheet metal, sketching ideas for the rear structure and the roof scoop, and having the front on. And that should be really solid. That'll be a bunch of progress. So I hope you guys enjoyed this thing. Talk to you next week.